So I just wanted to say that when, Chip, thanks so much for sharing all of that, and especially the personal detail at the end. And we all hope that your treatment goes well and is as endurable and successful as possible.
It's definitely real.
Is real. It is real. That's the thing, right? These real things are always happening in the background of our lives. You know, when I wrote down, you said something about being socially well, and it's hard for me, given the orientation that I come from about money, to think about how can you possibly be socially well if you're not financially well? And in fact, we see that in the data, right? We see that in the data about stress and the effect of stress driven by financial insecurity on people's ability to be healthy and therefore longevity. And it doesn't take too long to connect the dots between those who are suffering the most from financial insecurity, marginalized populations, to know that we need to have a conversation about who is and who is not yet enjoying the benefits of longevity. And I think that'll emerge in this conversation. So I'd like to go ahead and invite this group to the stage in any order that you all prefer. So I'll welcome Aurora Harris, the Senior Director of Strategy for Young Invincibles. Ann Ackerley is the head of the retirement group at BlackRock. And we have Oregon State Treasurer Tobias Reed. And you are very far away from me. So you can, I'm going to scoot a little bit forward so I can actually see you a little bit. So I am so excited about this conversation. Just one moment, please. Let's try that again. As I said in my introductory remarks, when we talk about longevity, I'm so glad that Laura said that at the top, because I think about we have an option other than to just add 30 years onto the end of life. We can choose something different. But if we do choose something different, we are going to have to think very deeply about our systems for funding and financing the full range of needs across the life cycle. And so today is a conversation that includes retirement savings, but also will maybe start at birth and cover a lot more than just how we finance that sort of later end of life. So I'm very excited about this group. And I will ask each of you to start by introducing yourself, you know, like maybe one more sentence on not just your name, title, but what you do every day. And then one thing, like a personal note about what excites you. We're going to start positive. What excites you about 100-year life? And Treasurer Reed, I'm going to start with you.
All right. Well, I'm excited to be here because this is a bit of a turnaround. It happened at Stanford a number of years ago. When I met a faculty member here named Ashby Monk, who works in a really interesting intersection of disciplines. And I was talking to him about the possibility of running for treasurer and why that excited me. And he listened to me for a little bit and he said, I think I can sum up your whole campaign philosophy in like 3 words. And I said, really? What? And he said, defeat short-termism. So I think that's it. So I feel really well connected to the agenda here. Being state treasurer gives us that opportunity to work really hard to defeat short-termism, both in the way we invest pension resources for nearly 400,000 people who serve the state of Oregon, and for individuals who happen to live in Oregon, to give them the individual power and agency. And that's something that continues to animate my work as I'm sad to say near the end of my second term as treasurer. There are term limits, so I'm feeling reflective about all this work. And I'm excited about the conversation today too.
Great. Ann.
Hi, everybody. Ann Ackerley. I run the U.S. retirement group at BlackRock, which means I'm working with, and my team, we're working with employers, large and small, throughout the United States on investment solutions within 401k plans. Order of magnitude, we manage 1.2 trillion in 80,000 different defined contribution plans, reaching 40 million Americans. So it's something I take, it's a privilege and it's a real responsibility. And we're very focused on how do we come up with investment solutions for the 100-year life. You also asked us like what we're excited, like I'm super excited about the 100-year life and the flexibility. And I have a new thing. It's not lifelong learning, it's long life learning. Already learning today how we're going to do that.
I'm going to push you a little harder. You shared with me some numbers earlier, and
I did.
When you define the flexibility, what that would have meant in your life.
So just in my own life, this is my 40th year of working. And in the last 40 years, I took 18 months off to get my MBA. and I took 2 months off each time I had a kid. So I have 2 kids. So that's 18 months out of 480 months. So less than 5% of my last 40 years have I been doing something other than working. And so I think the flexibility that everybody's been talking about already this morning is going to open up amazing things for people if we can figure out how to finance it.
Perfect, thank you. Aurora, over to you.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you all so much for having me. I was in your California traffic this morning. It was a lot. Just reflecting and feeling really grateful. I'm from a really like a working poor community, so to be on this campus along all you brilliant minds, it's just been amazing for me. But my name is Aurora. I'm the Senior Director of Regional Strategy at an organization called Young Invincibles. We do policy change for young people by young people around higher education, healthcare, workforce, and civic engagement. And my title is really long and fancy, but basically, strategy for us means how do we help marginalized people who are facing opposition with limited resources achieve their policy goals. And so I just help all of our states on the ground think through different strategies to achieve policy change for young people.
And what's something you're looking forward to or excited about as we think about the 100-year life?
Yeah, I think one thing that really excites me about the age of longevity, and as a millennial and all the different things, there's a lot that could come up with this because negative, but positive. I see it ultimately as a call to action. I see it ultimately as how are we going to fundamentally transform this country to be able to not only survive, but thrive. So that's what excites me the most.
Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to flip it. I want you to take a little more negative view. I previewed in my opening remarks that, we have a bit of a shaky foundation right now when it comes to people's financial lives in a lot of different ways. When you think about stretching out the lives in America that are already experiencing instability and insecurity in certain ways, and then stretching it out, right? What worries you, and which populations are of greatest concern to you as you look toward a 100-year life? And we can take it in any order. Who wants to jump in?
Well, I'll start with one thought that has been on my mind ever since we started anticipating this conversation, which is just, it's not so much specific populations, but the whole demographic trend that might be here. So I was really encouraged to hear the thought about not just assuming that there's a longer period of retirement, but thinking about what else we can do to sort of delay retirement or redefine retirement. But when I was in the legislature, I was on the revenue committee. So I thought a lot about how money came in. And in Oregon, we're one of the few states that does not have a sales tax. So we are uniquely dependent on the income tax. And that has me worried, thinking about how income is likely to decline over time, just as the need for services increases. So that mismatch is a problem. And it makes me think about whether we're going to have to think in new terms around wealth taxes, consumption taxes, just the whole way we finance all the things that we want and need from government. How's that for a good scenario to start? People can improve on that.
No, I'll go in and I worry a lot about the current system and how it doesn't serve particularly women and people of color. And today it's something like 26% of women retire into poverty. That is just way too much. And if you think about it, we kind of know why, right? When women get to retirement, their balances, at least in the United States, are 30 to 40% less than men's. And it's because we have a gender pay gap. We earn 82 cents on the dollar. And it's because of unpaid caregiving. Women provide most of the caregiving, both childcare and elder care. And I know we're going to get into a lot about that, but time out of the workforce does not help women save. Access, and we're going to talk about access, who has the ability to save in a 401k plan? And women often work in jobs where they don't have access, and you kind of add that all up, and yet women do live longer. And so they're not, the current system is not well suited, I think, in particular for women. And then people of color, I think the stats are, just even more devastating, right? There's a 7-to-1 savings gap between white Americans and Black Americans. It's 5-to-1 for Latinx, the Latinx community. And it's similar reasons, right? Pay gaps, the types of jobs, and also just how they use the system. And so that's what really I think we need to start working on a lot.
Yeah, yeah, and I would just echo all of that. Definitely most concerned about, Black communities, Latinx communities, migrant communities, and just thinking about the racial wealth gap and how so many structures are reinforcing it. Even before the pandemic, it was stagnant at best, and now with the pandemic, it has broken over so many fault lines. And so I'm definitely really centering folks of color right now in this moment, for sure.
I appreciate all of that. And I think maybe knowing we have an audience from many different backgrounds, I wonder if we might back up a touch and give a little bit of that sort of high level on retirement savings and why it's not working, right? So I don't know who wants to take a stab at like pension plans, mostly a thing of the past. We've gone all to 401ks or defined contribution, right? Anybody want to do a quick high level tour of, and the fact that employers don't have to offer a plan, right?
Yeah, that's the key, and I'm sure Ann will add a lot more than I'm capable of. But I'm always struck by the fact that the stat in Oregon, which is true across the country, is about half of people work in a job where they don't have access to a retirement plan.
Yeah.
Half of people who are working already.
And that's true nationwide.
Yes.
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 That's right.
So that's a big problem.
So I'm one of those finance nerds you talked about
Yeah.
that you
And I love
sort
you
of
for it.
like, but whatever.
No, I love you for it.
And I do. I've tons and tons of statistics, right? But about half of the private sector does not have access to any kind of workplace savings plan, and yet we know when they do, they're 15 to 20 times more likely to save, right? So the fact that employers don't have to provide it is a real limiting factor, I think, for people's ability to save. And yes, this argument then goes, oh, but they can save. There are individual retirement accounts. People are busy.
We could play this out. I could do the argument for it.
Yeah,
People can. They can go. They can do it on their own.
They can do it on their own. People are busy. They're living their lives. We could probably, I run the retirement group, and if my things weren't automatic, I wouldn't save. And, I have 2 adult children, and I'm constantly beating them up to get them to enroll and to save. And so the lack of access, I think, there are other issues, but I think we can start with lack of access is one of the big ones.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, we did a report at Young Invincibles around short-term Pell. So we're in a fight to see if we can get the Pell Grant to apply to other things, not just 4-year and 2-year college. And out of that report came that we're still seeing a lot of occupational segregation amongst folks of color, right, who are, really still in these lower income, sort of lower level jobs that have no, to your guys' point, opportunity for savings at work. And then I would also say to folks who say we have these individual plans, we're really trying to push back against this idea of individualism overall, right? And I think what the keynote speaker so wonderfully talked about was this idea of interdependence, right? And how we all do better when we're kind of supporting and caring for each other, and even like workplaces offering that, I think is a sign of that too.
Yeah, and I want to call out 2 people in the audience. Deb Whitman, I know you're on the agenda later. Her team at the ARP Public Policy Institute is sort of the last word in how many people in America do and do not have access. And it's the latest is 57 million Americans do not have access to retirement savings at work. So I was thinking about, Chip, what you said about people have a time affluence. Well, not everybody has time affluence, because a lot of people have the plan to keep working, right, in order to be able to fund their needs. And I know Surya Kaluri from TIA has some fresh data to speak to people's plans, how they're going to finance that retirement. I also want to say, for the Californians in here, you are fortunate, much like the Oregonians, you all have a very forward-thinking policy. I see Katie Solinsky over there in the corner, former director of Cal Savers in California. You do have a requirement that every employer, effectively, no matter how small, has to auto-enroll workers. So that's the envy, these programs from where I sit in Michigan. We don't have that envy of the nation yet. Just right. Keep me positive, but it's a real patchwork, right? My point is, I think it was important to go down this road so that everybody who's not a retirement nerd here understands that this is not your grandma's retirement anymore. Pension plans are mostly a thing of the past, and that's true globally. And there are massive gaps in access that make a conversation about longevity really, we have to connect it to what's real about what people have in terms of their ability to save. Okay.
And maybe Karen, we should just on this notion of we've gone from those guaranteed pensions to the 401k where people have to do it themselves. We're really just beginning to see those people who had to do it themselves start to retire.
That's right.
So, you know, when we look and say, well, what do people in their 80s, how are they managing? Well, it may not be applicable because many of them probably had guaranteed pensions.
Right.
And so it's really the people born in the 60s that are just starting to retire
That's
that
right.
don't have these
That's
pension
right.
plans.
Which makes it so much more important, these auto enroll plans, to get people in that habit early on in their careers. I had the good fortune to testify about our plan once in front of the US Senate, and somebody said, what's the one thing that, you know, you could improve things? I said, make it, you know, reduce the age of majority requirement for people to start. It should be the first job someone gets, whether they're 14 or 15 or whatever. Start that IRA then and get into that habit of knowing that some of your income needs to go to savings. The powerful forces of compound interest ought to get started as early as possible.
So thank you for indulging me going down that road a little bit.
It was really hard for us.
I know. That's what's so great about you guys. So I want to turn to Aurora. You work on a wide range of sort of household economic security
Yes.
issues. And on our prep call, we did identify, right? So from a generational perspective, we've got, okay, raise your hand if you're a baby boomer. Raise your hand if you're Gen X. Raise your hand if you're a millennial. Okay. Although I'm going to be honest with you guys, I'm 1980 and that splits the difference. So am I X? Am I don't know.
Dual
We don't know.
citizenship.
We don't know the answer. I have dual citizenship. That's right. That's right. But I am curious, you know, in a conversation about longevity, why do we have young Invincibles on the stage? What's the young people's stake in a conversation about longevity when you look at the wide range of issues that you work on at Young Invincibles and you're talking about longevity? What comes to mind for you as hot spot priority issues, especially for the populations that you focus on the
Yeah,
most?
that's such a good question. Shout out to my millennials in the audience. If we had not eaten that avocado toast, we'd be able to afford that house. Shout out to us. No,
It was
but
worth it.
It was
But it was
worth
worth
it. So good. No, but we have a lot at stake, right? I mean, we are one of the largest voting blocs. We're one of the largest, you know, working demographics right now. So we have a lot at stake. We are inheriting this economic and political system that, quite frankly, is just unsustainable. We have so many issues that are in front of us. I can think about my own story as a first-generation college student, you know, coming out of college, about $60,000 in debt for a bachelor's degree. You know, my family, generations of systemic racism, couldn't afford to send me, so I graduate with that. Come out making about 30, 40 grand a year. So my debt to income ratio was terrible. Not to mention that I'm sending money back home, right? Because I'm one of the first people to actually finish college and be able to have some sort of a salary and income in retirement. And that's so many young people's stories, so many young people of color stories in particular, of trying to live this American dream and get out of this thing, but you're stuck, right? Because our systems aren't investing in us the way that they should be. And so we're tackling a wide range of issues, like you mentioned. I mean, we're looking at higher education. We say debt cancellation, not debt forgiveness, because we didn't do anything wrong. We also are looking at healthcare access. We're seeing a lot of people, you know, coming off the pandemic. They're being pushed off their Medicaid emergency plans. So we're looking like, how do we have healthcare access for all in this age of longevity? I think the millennials are going to be the generation that gets us in healthcare for all in this country. And we're also looking at, yeah, thank you. And then, you know, we're also looking at sustainable wages. I think we've been talking a lot about, you know, what that looks like, and also how are we going to fund throughout our life cycle. There are going to be times where people are not going to have to work. We already recognize that as a country in terms of disability and, you know, elder adults. But what about funding things like targeted income? And right now we're running a bill in California that looks at targeted income support for homeless youth who are exiting high school and trying to go to college, right? So like, how do we kind of fund that on and off ramp of work too? Because we don't want to spend the whole 100 years working. Like, come on, get out of here. So we're trying to figure out like, you know, like new ways of doing that. But millennials have a huge stake in this. And the last thing I'll say is, I know when we have these conversations, this idea of declining birth rates kind of come into the question. and folks start talking a lot about how millennial women are, not having as many children. And I like to see it as sort of it's like an informal birth strike that's happening right now, where it's like the childcare is too much, the cost is just too much. And so we have a lot at stake, and it's actually playing out in our lives right now, this longevity question, for sure.
Which brings us back to, when you think about how Social Security is funded, right? We have a bona fide expert in the audience, and Jason Fichtner, who you'll be hearing from later. But that birth rate, how expensive we have made life for younger people in real terms, is going to have consequences for the way we fund longevity later. So I want to pick up on this theme about, the picture Aurora is painting is that it's not just retirement savings on its own. You have to have a financial life where everything else is working well to be able to save. Like, a lot has to be going right in your life financially to be able to even save for retirement, if you even have access. And I wonder if you guys, I'd love to hear from you. What is the thing that worries you? What's the fix we need to make most urgently across the financial lifespan in order to support a 100-year life? What fix would you make, or what would you invest in now? To Laura's point about we really can't wait.
I think it's more and more exposure for younger and younger people, just with the opportunity to save, that seeing small wins early on, getting that in their minds and in their experience. That can happen academically, can happen outside in various settings, but just the notion that that's going to be something throughout your life. The notion of delayed gratification and savings, on and on and on from the beginning.
Do you want to name check a particular policy or product or solution?
Well, we're engaging it in Oregon right now. The legislature just passed a bill that will require a course in order to graduate from high school in both financial, we say empowerment rather than literacy, and planning. So the theory is to think about what comes after high school, whether that's going to be college or apprenticeships or something else, and how that will require various planning efforts and decisions. So getting that deliberate exposure early on, I think, is going to pay big dividends over time.
I'm going to say, I know you asked us like the one thing.
I did, but I'm going to allow you to off-road.
Okay. There is no one thing. And if the one thing that I've learned in focusing on retirement and financing is it's got to be a combination probably of a bunch of smaller things. And, what comes to mind for me, we've talked about access. Like, again, that would be my number one thing, that people have to have a way to save, and we have to make it easier. But other things that come to mind, emergency savings, and what is the connection between short-term savings and long-term savings. And we have that statistic, 40% of Americans couldn't afford a $400 emergency expense. And so we know that we've got to get people to be able to save short-term before they can save long-term. And how did you talked about what's that connection and how does that work? And there has been legislation to start to work on that, but there's a lot more we need to do there. I mean, the other thing that I think a lot about is caregiving. And I'm certainly no expert on caregiving, but we've got to find a way that we recognize that it is work. And the statistic, let me just look, statistic about how many companies in America actually provide paid child maternity leave is very, very small. I think it's like maybe 35% of companies provide paid maternity leave. And so we've got to find a way that we give women, men credit for the caregiving that they do. And I do know there's a bill out there that would actually give women or caregivers credit up against their Social Security. So I think if we think about the big thing, we might go down a path. We've got to think, I think, about a lot of fixes to the system.
I love that. Aurora, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, I definitely agree that there's no silver bullet. I think one of the things that we're really thinking about at Young Invincibles right now is definitely opening access to capital for young people and things like micro lending for budding entrepreneurs. We also love Cal Savers and this idea of auto enrollment in 401k plans. But I think ultimately, and I think I heard this from my fellow panelists, is just this idea of both taking seriously like repair to communities that have been harmed by our extractive economy, and then also really taking seriously investment in young people. And I think if we do those two things one day, we will be on a really, really solid path. I mean, I think the Biden's student loan plan to particularly target cancellation for folks who are Pell Grant recipients is a really good way of thinking about how do we have more equitable, targeted solutions to a lot of these things. So I just think those two things, repair and investment, would be really huge.
It's a really nice bridge to my next question, which is, I asked you toward the top about who are you most concerned about? And I've been thinking a little bit about the way that I forget what Laura said, that the rapidity of the extension of longevity. I can't remember the exact statistic, but that it's happened very fast, right? This extension of what's possible in terms of human life. And does this give us a leapfrog opportunity? Is this a moment where we might say, if we take groups of people in our society who have been at a disadvantage in terms of building financial stability and security, what might we do right now at this moment of rapidly changing longevity to put them at an advantage? Can we leapfrog them over? What can we do? And I wonder what comes to mind for you, whether it's you want to think about like a moonshot. We are, after all, out here in Silicon Valley-ish, or what comes to mind in terms of a leapfrog opportunity? What does that look like?
I've got an idea, but I recognize that we keep having this
We
trend
do.
with me going first. So I don't want to be the first.
Let's flip it.
Yes.
Aurora, who would
You want me to go first?
Yeah. Who would you leapfrog and how?
Who would I leave? I mean, I would go back to repair. I mean, I would really take seriously things like land reclamation, things like reparations. I would also take seriously, we've had a really great opportunity during the pandemic to recognize our interdependence around health. And so I would definitely leapfrog, like, how do we make sure immigrant communities have access to healthcare no matter their immigration status? So those would probably be my top three if I had to leapfrog us.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right, so my leapfrog is the notion of, and you've said it a few times today, early wealth building accounts. And I think we really need to start at birth for getting people to save. And I don't think it could be that hard.
Says the asset manager.
Says there are 18 years of life before somebody gets to the age where maybe they're going to invest in their education, or and maybe they don't buy a home till they're at 30, or they want to set up a business. And we could use those 18 years of taking a relatively small amount of money, invested in markets, and let it compound. And I think when I think about what you're saying and trying to get our young people to where they can invest in themselves, we need to start really early. And so it's, they're called baby bonds, right? Connecticut, I think, has an experiment.
Many states do, yeah.
Many states, a 401k kids, whatever you want to call it, and they can be designed differently, but it's the notion of start at birth, have it be the individual's money, and let them invest in themselves. So that, I think that leapfrogs. And I guess there's research, and Karen, you're so close to this, but there's research that this really could make a meaningful impact on the racial wealth gap in the United States.
This is exactly what I wanted to talk about, and I'll just build on it by adding two specific things. So in Oregon, we have college savings plans like everyone else, but we've done something unusual in that we took the tax deduction that existed and improved it, because of course the deduction is only useful to people who are itemizing, and that's not that many. So we went to the legislature and changed it to a refundable tax credit, so it works for people at every income level. We went further and made it progressive, so it's dollar for dollar for the lowest income folks, and as income goes up, the credit phases out. But there's an even more unique opportunity in Oregon that I'm really excited about. But it's easy for me to say this as a lame duck treasurer, so it's for the next treasurer to figure out. But this requires a little bit of history. Those of us in the West will this works a little more. It's a little more relevant. So when Oregon joined the United States, We needed some schools. We didn't have any tax base. So the federal government said you get the 5th and 25th section of each township for the purpose of supporting public education. Over time, that land has been consolidated, some has been sold off, and there's an endowment there called the Common School Fund. It's a $2.5 billion. It spins off some money, but in the context of a multi-billion-dollar school budget, this little bit from the Common School Fund does not make a significant difference. So I would like to go to voters and change the Constitution to allow those Common School Funds to seed baby bonds, and the numbers would work out really nicely to put $1,000 in an account for each Oregon-born baby and get them started. So
I mean, it sounds like it's almost like we planted you here by inviting you to be here.
You didn't?
I mean, it's magical the way you're talking, but I mean, I think there are a lot of us starting to dial in on the idea that we simply are not going to be able to close or even approach closing any of the wealth gaps, racial, gender, generational, or geographic. Right, there are 4 of them that I think really matter, with the racial one being the starkest gap, without investing the moment babies are born. We literally won't get there. And the good news is there's lots of experimentation happening at the state and local level. Some of them are baby bonds, some of them are child savings accounts, some of them are souped up CSAs. And I think that many of us have been in conversation with policymakers in Washington who are drafting legislation. Will it pass? Who knows? But the idea is these are ideas that are beginning to be made real. And I think it's exciting to start to think about that birth all the way through longevity, not only what we could do in terms of building assets, but also what could that build in terms of accounts that are lifelong and portable. To our point at the top about access, if I had an account given to me at birth, it is always mine.
And the impact
Could
that
it
has.
convert into my retirement savings account over time?
Everybody in this room probably knows the Willie Elliott study, about 300% more likely for any kid to go to college who has an account, no matter how much is in it. It's the expectation, the mindset that that kid is worthwhile.
So it's exciting to hear this idea being discussed. And there's many papers all of us can share with you. We're all excited about it. I'll ask one more question, and that is this: if you look at the agenda today, you'll see that this money conversation is nestled in a section that's about community. And I'd love for the 3 of you to reflect a little bit on how you think about all of these issues of household cash flow and expense and debt and savings and investment across a lifespan. How do you connect these issues to this broader question of community and what kind of community it will take to support the 100-year life? What does that mean to you?
Okay, I'll go. You want me to go first? Okay. A community means everything if we're going to be able to do this project together. I think not only is it just hard, just like making friends and building community, but our political and economic systems don't allow for it, and I would argue don't want it, right? And so not only do we have to play pickleball with each other, but we also have to work to like dismantle those systems together. And it's going to require us to have a huge narrative shift. Right now, the narrative in our country is one of rugged individualism, of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. And we're going to have to shift to a narrative of interdependence. And so I think that's just going to take all of us to be able to do that. And without that, we're not going to be able to get all the things we need to fund this longevity in this lifespan.
I think there's room to help people not feel as intimidated and ashamed about these questions. Some of us were lucky to grow up in situations where we had the capacity to take some of these questions on, and some of us were not. And that's, as you said, Aurora, not our fault. So getting to the place where people can have not a parental sort of interest, but an attitude of helping each other. I think about when we started the Oregon Saves project, we did a bunch of interviews with people around the state, and there's one interview that sticks with me. A guy named Bud, who worked at a nonprofit ski area in Southern Oregon, and he's describing how he didn't know about retirement. He didn't know what to do, and you can watch his brows kind of furrowed, and he's kind of nervous, and you can sense the kind of anxiety in it. And then as he turns the conversation and says, "But now with Oregon Saves," and his whole face brightens, and he says, I feel like I'm getting ahead. Like there's a path for me.
Mm.
So the notion of community where we're in it together, and just as you said, Aurora, we can be interdependent, I think is really powerful.
I mean, they've sort of said, you know, I think about the inequalities in the United States, you know, in wealth, in income, in longevity. I mean, those can be shocking as well. And I think they are leading to pulling our society apart and pulling our communities apart. And some of the discord I think we're seeing here can be linked to that. And so I think we have to figure this out in order to have community and to have the well-being of our community and of our society.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a social contract, right? In a way
It
that we're
is.
talking about. And there are financial aspects to that. We can't talk about life without talking about how we finance it. And I want to leave it there. And please join me in thanking Treasurer Reed and Anne and Aurora.